Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everybody. This is Howard Fox. For my co-host, Randy Ford, I want to welcome you to another edition of the Success Insight podcast. I hope you are all having a fantastic day. Now, listen, according to my guest, language is not merely words and grammatical structures, but how we humans interact with each other and the world around them. Our guest shares that human interaction is essential for acquiring language, and a person must feel and experience the language with all the senses to build language pathways to the brain. Now, Elizabeth Porter is a language school owner, a public speaker, and a curriculum specialist, and she is the author of the new book, Pathways to Language Fluency, Changing the Way We Think About Language in the United States. Elizabeth, welcome to the Success Insight podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to talk.
Fantastic. And I have to share with you, in the spirit of full disclosure, when I was little, I set out to learn two languages. The first one is all kids in my neighborhood. We all went to Hebrew school, and I think maybe for a couple of years I could string some sentences together. And then in high school and in college, I had to take Spanish courses. And I will share with you, I failed miserably. And I can only believe that with the work that you're doing and the methods you're using, I probably would have been fluent in either one of those had I continued to learn the languages. So I'm really excited to kind of chat with you about your work. So tell us a little bit about, for our listeners, who we are and how'd you get into this line of work?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to tell you that we do offer Hebrew at my school. I just think it's funny that you mentioned that. It's one of the languages that a lot of people are looking for, but have a hard time finding. So I started out, I always kind of wanted to be a teacher. I used to play school when I was a kid. And as I got older, I really found language fascinating. French, I've always been very, very passionate about French. I lived in France. I went to college in France. I taught there after college and lived there for a while. And it's just always been my passion. And I was a high school teacher for several years. And I also taught in a French immersion school in Seattle. And I taught the way that I had been taught to teach language, which is pretty much par for the course all over the US and a lot of places all over the world as well. Just translation methods, vocabulary. And I had the opportunity to go do some trainings at a school, which is now my school's partner school called Cavillam in Vichy, France. And I learned so much. It changed my whole way of thinking about how we teach language. And then my son was born and he's autistic and he didn't speak. And I watched the way in which he learned to speak. Now you can't shut him up, honestly. But a light bulb went off in my head. And I said, you know what? We need to teach people to interact with others all over the world, not just, learn a language for learning a language's sake, but actually interact with the culture. And how can we make this better? And so I started doing a lot of research on brain science and how the brain acquires language naturally. And why don't we teach language with the same process that we learn our first language, et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of how it came about.
So I'm curious, a couple areas. One is, I remember in school, flashcards. I mean, especially for the Hebrew. Did you work on your flashcards? And my parents, my mom, Howard, go work on your flashcards. So here's the word, here's the translation. And it's funny, I can still read Spanish, I can still read Hebrew, more or less. But, that's what I remember, that flashcards. I remember memory. I remember trying to string a couple words together with the conjugations in Spanish in school. And I just like, oh my God, this is just my brain. Speaking of brain science, I just didn't think my brain was wired for that kind of immersion into the language. And so there's this light bulb, and I love the fact that you said that, because, when the light bulbs start going pop, pop, pop in our head, that's the insight, and which is kind of why we call our show Success Insight, because there's a moment of this insight. As you had the experience that you went through and going to France, what were the big comparisons, contrasts, I guess it would be comparisons and contrasts between the two methods, and why were they so different, and why are they doing it? And except for you now, Why aren't we trying to do that here in the U.S.?
Right. That's a great question, and I have a lot of answers for that. So let me try to keep this.
We've got a lot of time. We got a lot of time.
So first of all, you mentioned flashcards and translation. First of all, I love flashcards. I am very anti-translation. And let me explain that. In the language learning world, there is a lot of controversy around whether you should teach with translation or not. I am definitely in the camp of no translation. And so I like to use images, songs, rhythms, stories. Think about when you're a baby and you're learning language as a baby. What do you do for the first year or so of your life? You listen, right? That's the first process that happens. The second thing that happens is you start imitating words and coming out with different sounds. The next thing that happens is you start stringing words together. You don't read until way later. You don't write until way later. And so it's really, I hear so often, I can read this still, but I can't say anything. So what I try to say is, there is a process by which our brain acquires language. And when we put the translation in there, it interrupts that process. It breaks that process, and it makes us depend on the first language in order to learn the second language. Along those lines, I think a lot of people confuse accuracy with fluency and also interpretation with translation. And let me tell you a little bit about accuracy versus fluency. Fluency is the process by which your brain can process language and then produce it. Accuracy is focusing on every single word to try to put a sentence together or to try to communicate what you want to communicate. I am speaking to you currently with fluency. Now, I'm speaking to you in English, which is my language, my native language. And so therefore, I'm speaking to you with very little mistakes, hopefully none.
Hopefully.
But honestly, fluency has nothing to do with whether you make mistakes or not. Fluency has everything to do with the speed at which you can understand and the speed at which you can produce language, and if you can get your point across and communicate. And the second thing I talked about was interpretation versus translation. Translation would be giving a student a word and then turning the flashcard over, like you said, and giving them that word in English. So French word on one side, English word on the other side. That is translation. Interpretation would be like, I read you a story. You don't have the language to tell me what the story was about in the target language. And when I say target language, I mean the language you're learning. So you tell me what the story was about. You summarize it in your native language. There's a difference between that process and translation. The reason why translation doesn't work is because it makes us focus too much on being accurate. And it causes anxiety and it causes reliance on the first language.
My God, you've just described my life growing up. Oh my God. It's interesting. Last year, 2 years ago, I went with friends. And so I guess I should, a little bit of context is I have a lot of friends here in Chicago who are in the Belgian community. And like most Europeans, Belgian, the Dutch, French, German speak multiple languages, which is, to me, is mind-boggling, but it's also fantastic because most of us in the U.S. growing up, we speak one language, English. We're lucky if we get a little bit of immersion into Spanish or French. And I remember a number of us went to Chile a couple of years ago. And I remember if they spoke slow or if I could read a newspaper or mostly the newspapers, I think the magazines, I could kind of figure out what was going on. But I had really just by kind of seeing the words, I could kind of make sense of it all. But I couldn't. There's just no way I could interact. Mm-hmm. But I found it frustrating because I would love to be able, like you can go to France and right away you could start speaking the language and nobody would ever know that you're some English girl from Seattle. So what's the difference then between the work that's how we learn here in the US versus what you were seeing and how things were different in France or the other parts of Europe?
So let me go back a little bit and tell you some history about the U.S. and why I feel that we have this situation in the U.S. where only about 1% of our population can speak another language at intermediate proficiency. My great-grandmother came over from Italy. She immigrated. And by the time she was an adult, she spoke zero Italian, which is really sad because at that time, immigrants were, encouraged to assimilate and speak English. And it was really looked down upon to speak another language in your home or in your community.
I don't think that's changed very much.
No, it really hasn't. And I think that's where the history of this lack of learning another language, I mean, even in Canada where they have 2 official languages. And that's really interesting to me because honestly, we don't have an official language in the United States. And so, it's a really interesting dynamic to me. And we see little pockets of immersion programs coming up, but in the end, there's not enough teachers to teach them because we start so late. And there's not enough budget for a lot of schools and school districts to provide these programs, but they're so needed. In my community, there's a Spanish immersion program that is incredible, and the students come out after kindergarten speaking fluently. In Europe, the other issue is in the United States, let me go back again, is that we are a huge country that's located between 2 oceans. So we basically don't have the need to speak another language because, it takes a lot to travel to another country. I mean, even if you go up to Canada, you can get by in English, and you go down to Mexico and most people think you can get by in English. So, I mean, it's not a necessity, an immediate necessity for us in the US. Now take Europe, for example. Europeans travel a lot around Europe, and there are lots of different languages around Europe, and there are lots of different people to interact with and communicate with. And so for them, it's more of a necessity when traveling around to know your neighbor's language. So anyway, I think that a lot of our history has something to do with it. Our geography has something to do with it. But again, now times are changing and people are moving abroad more than ever and moving around. And even it's not necessarily to communicate with other people who speak another language. It's also a way of opening your eyes to another culture and giving you the skills to interact with people maybe in your workplace that come from a different background, religion, different culture, whatever. It gives us interpersonal skills as well.
Most definitely. And so let's take the context we've just built and let's talk about the Bon Voyage World Languages Academy. And then, of course, we want to get into the book and how that's serving your message and your vision. So tell us a little bit about the Academy. What is the purpose, who's the audience, and how is that a part of your plans for changing the way we learn languages?
I've always been a person who likes to do things my way. And I am very admittedly...
Shame on you.
I know. I'm very open about the fact that I don't like being told what to do. And so for me, once I discovered all of this that I had been researching through my son and through going to the program in France and all of this, I said to myself, I can't do it any other way anymore. And I was a curriculum specialist in my district at one point, and I was being pressured to adopt a curriculum that I knew was terrible. Mm. And my son was born and I left. And it was from that point on that I thought, I could make this happen, at some point. And I started teaching classes online. And I thought, I'm just going to teach a couple classes online and see how it goes. And I got up and I taught the way I would teach in front of an in-person class. And it worked. It worked like a charm. And my classes got bigger and bigger and bigger to the point where I needed to hire 2 more teachers.
That's fantastic.
Yes. So I did that. And then we added 12 languages. And here we are today.
So what I'm hearing you say then is it really doesn't matter the language, it's the method of teaching or instructing the language. That's what makes the difference.
Yeah, that and the fact that, I have a lot of parents who come to me and say, well, what language is the most useful? Or I want my child to learn this language because I think it's more useful than this other one. And my answer to that is it doesn't matter. What matters is the effect on the brain, because learning a language also builds the prefrontal cortex.
Right.
And so, it doesn't matter. And if your child is passionate, or if you are passionate about the language you're learning, then you will find a use for it. So, I always encourage people, choose the language you want to learn, not the one you think you should.
And what ages come into the academy? I know you just mentioned the children, but I'm like, oh my God, I can become more fluent now. When I go to my friends' Belgian, French parties, I can speak. I don't just have to say, I want another beer.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. So right now we are K through 12. So we serve students in kindergarten through 12th grade, and our classes meet standards. So and all of our teachers are certified. Most of them are native speakers. And so we have credit available. We have had adults in the past. We typically do adult classes as private lessons just because adults are busy and our adult programs haven't taken off as much. And then we also have a really interesting program where we've been working with some Canadian companies, and they bring workers, or they send workers abroad, and we teach the language that the workers need to learn. And so we have those special classes for professionals, and we also have some diplomats.
Oh my God, that is so exciting. I'm like, I would love to be able to start to consume and learn a new language. And then, I love, like I love to travel, and it's about the language, it's the culture. For me, it's also the food, and just, going to the market and asking for the fruit or the vegetable or the spice in the native language, rather than just pointing and speaking in English, hoping, oh my God, they should understand because I'm pointing and speaking English.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Now, obviously you have a lot of passion around French because that you studied there and have lived there. In addition to French, are there other languages that you're passionate about, or is it just, hey, it's language and I get to help kids learn in whatever language they're passionate about?
Yeah, well, obviously French is the one language that I'm, over the moon about. Like, I would rather speak French than English. And in fact, I speak French more, I think, in my everyday life than I speak English. But any language, of course, I would say, if you have one language to pick French, please. But, obviously not everybody has the passion that I have for France and for French. And so I would definitely say that my biggest passion is helping people interact with other people in general. Just let's learn about each other. And language is the vehicle for doing that. I also love to write curriculum. There is nothing I love more in my job than writing curriculum and teaching other teachers about the method and about the curriculum that I write. In fact, I am going to Atlanta tomorrow to do a training with the American Association of Teachers of Spanish, and I am beyond excited to work with them because every time I'm asked to go and teach the method, it's just very exciting to me. And, of course, I'm extremely extroverted. And so just working with people is something I absolutely love.
I would not have picked that up. Now, unfortunately, your camera is not working, but I would imagine your eyes just lit up, the smile on your face. And so I'm curious, well, a couple of things, because, and I had mentioned to you that this time goes by very quickly.
Right.
And a couple of things I want to do. I'd love to talk a little bit about the book, Pathways to Language Fluency. And I would also like to hear some of the insights, or what of your clients children, or the folks or the companies that are hiring you to help their teams go into another country and perform. I'd like to hear what some of those insights are, and really at the end of the day, and I have a feeling I know what the answer might be, but looking back, what are you most proud of? So let's talk about the book, because that's the original reason why, we met and we wanted you to come on as a guest. So let's talk about this book.
Yeah, so I am not a writer. I mean, I write curriculum, and that's a little different than writing a book, right? So
I equate it to birthing a baby, but that's just me.
I'm not a writer. In fact, I don't enjoy writing. And all of a sudden, this idea popped into my head is like, I have to write my story. I have to tell people about how I got to where I am and how I started doing what I love to do. And that's basically how it started. I just had this, I was actually just sitting doing something very mundane. And I was like, it just popped in my head, write a book. You have to write a book. You have to write a book. So I did, and I wrote it in a week. I mean, if you can believe it. And
wow. Yeah.
I'm writing another book right now, and I've been writing it for 6 months, but this one came out in about a week, out of my brain, I should say. And, it was several months of editing and revising and going back and rewriting things. And I'm kind of a perfectionist, so I did it over a few times, but I really felt strongly that I needed to, like I said, write my story. And that's how it came about. So yeah.
Fantastic. And what has been the reception to the book in the community, your peers, your teachers, the folks that who are your intended audience for the book?
Yeah, so I've had a lot of positive feedback on the book. There's a lot of people who have said, I've read your book and it's really great. And I've had a lot of teachers read it, but also I've had a few people who are language learners that have read it and said, I really understand what you have to say. This is an easy read for me. I wanted to write it so that it wasn't super teachery and technical. You know what I mean? I wanted a person who wasn't in my field to be able to understand the method and what works. And so I wrote it for anyone interested in learning language, but I mainly wanted my colleagues to grab a hold of it and hear what I had to say.
And thinking about your clients, the folks that are coming into, the kids that are coming into your world through the Bon Voyage World Languages Academy, what are they having to say about when they come out of the program and their capabilities, abilities?
We have very positive feedback. It's obviously a very out-of-the-box method, and it's not what they're used to, and sometimes not what they're not expecting. But the students, we have many, many students who have been with us for the 3 years that the school has been open, and they keep coming back because we have such a unique method, and they are able to communicate. And the most rewarding thing that happens with our students is when they go abroad and they realize that they can communicate without having to think about it. It's just second nature. And, that's the ultimate proof right there that what we're doing is beneficial.
That's fantastic. And I'm thinking to myself, what book do I want? What language do I want? And having said that, I probably would go with French, because I think French it's such a global language.
Yay! And you're right, it is.
All right. And so we'll have to have that conversation afterwards. Yeah. In our time together that we have left, we always ask our guests about what we call an insight to go, something they'd like to share at the end of the episode. It could be an idea, a quote, some success tip. What would your insight to go be for our listeners on the show?
Well, I think that everyone should read The Little Prince, Le Petit Prince. If they haven't in their lives, it's an essential book. It's a great way to, see what's important in life and hear about what's important in life. And there's a quote from The Little Prince that's my favorite.
Please read it.
I will. I'll say it in French and then I'll say it in English.
Okay.
On ne voit bien qu'avec le cœur, ce qui est essentiel est invisible pour les yeux. It is only with the heart that one sees rightly what is essential is invisible to the eye. And it's a book about an introspective look on the author's life, and it's told through the eyes of a little boy who is from another planet, who doesn't understand things and is trying to interact with the world around him. And it's a beautiful book, and I think every single person on this whole planet should read it.
So I thank you very much for sharing the quote. And I give you, if I was a Boy Scout, I'm holding my, I don't even know what fingers to put up, but I'd give him, I will read the Le Petit Prince. I promise that. Can I read it in English?
Of course. Yeah.
Okay.
It's translated. It's the 4th most translated book in the world. So
fantastic. Well, we'll definitely put a link back to that as well. Now, so that our listeners can learn more about you and your work, what are the best ways to find you and get to know you?
Well, there's the website, which is www.bvwla.com, and they can email us or me, Elizabeth Porter at bonvoyagefrance.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I don't know what the LinkedIn link is off the top of my head, but I'm sure you have it.
We'll take care of that one for you.
We're on Facebook. Bon Voyage is on Facebook. Yeah, those are the main ways to get a hold of us. They can call the school if they want. The number's on the website, or I can give it here if you think that would be useful.
We are going to put the links back to the website, to the books on Amazon. We'll also put your LinkedIn profile and also a link back to your Facebook group. So we're going to give everybody multiple paths to learn more about you and your school. And I'm making an assumption here that you can take students from anywhere.
Yeah, we can. We can take students from anywhere. In fact, we've had students from all over the world come to our school. And we also have immersion programs. So we have a fantastic immersion program in France with our partner school as well.
Fantastic. And I'm like, okay, all I need is more clients, more time and money, and I'm in. I'm in. Just visiting a country and just interacting, going shopping, cooking, taking pictures. It's like, I live for that.
Yeah. It's a fantastic experience. And the students come back with a wider view of the world, which is beautiful.
That's fantastic. We're definitely over time, and that's okay because this is my show and I can go over time when I want to. But I am curious, and something was interesting to me as you mentioned your son who is autistic, and I think he's gotten interested in reading or speaking, and I'm curious how this method has enhanced his abilities to communicate.
Well, yeah, that's a great question. When he was learning to communicate, first of all, he's incredibly intelligent. So he picks language up, and I think he has a gift for language. He can hear tones very well, and he's a singer. But I believe that this method has helped him a lot because when we were teaching him to speak, he used images to associate with words, with what he wanted to say first. We used picture schedules with him. We used a method called PECS, which is a picture system where autistic children associate pictures with needs, and they communicate through pictures. And that was kind of a light bulb moment for me too, because I was like, if this works for autistic children, then this could really work in the language classroom as well. And so, this is a very special needs friendly method as well.
Fantastic. And I think that the message you've just shared in the story about your son is very important because, on the show, and our listeners, you never know, where their life is, what challenges they're having. And so if we can, provide at least an intro to an opportunity to learn more and maybe affect their lives with their child who is autistic, then we've just done a good service. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Elizabeth, I do really, really want to thank you. I'm very grateful for you spending time out of your no doubt busy day. You've got to go to Atlanta tomorrow. But to share about your work and also the book, Pathways to Language Fluency, Changing the Way We Think About Language in the United States. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to spend with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Well, there you have it, folks. We have been having a great conversation with Elizabeth Porter. She is just a talented, a language school owner, public speaker. She has done a TED Talk. And if you do check out her YouTube, there's a YouTube video there that you might want to check out about how she actually teaches the language. It's very interesting. And, she's a curriculum specialist. And of course, her book, Pathways to Language Fluency, Changing the Way We Think About Language in the United States. We'll have a link back to Amazon on our show notes, as well as the Facebook. and also the Bon Voyage World Languages Academy website. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And hey, go out there, learn another language, and have a phenomenal day at the same time. This is Howard Fox, the Success Insight Podcast, and we will see you again for the next episode. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.